I want to begin with something simple, almost uncomfortable in its honesty. There is a quiet pain that many intelligent, sensitive, and perceptive people carry, and it sounds like this: no matter where I go, I don't quite belong. Not dramatically, not loudly, just a subtle, persistent sense of being slightly out of place everywhere. If you have felt this, I am speaking directly to you. Let me ask you a sincere question before we go any further. Have you ever looked around a room full of people, conversation, laughter, and felt as though you were observing life rather than participating in it? If that question touches something in you, write it in the comments, not to confess, but to recognize one another. Most people assume that not fitting in is a social failure. They think it means they are awkward, deficient, or missing some essential skill that others seem to possess effortlessly. But that assumption is itself part of the problem. It is a shallow explanation for a very deep experience. The hidden reason you don't fit in anywhere is not because you lack something, it is because you sense something that others overlook. Human societies are built on unspoken agreements. Agreements about what matters. Agreements about what success looks like. Agreements about what is appropriate to feel, say, want, or question. And fitting in largely means accepting these agreements without examining them too closely. But some people cannot do this easily, not because they are rebellious by nature, but because something in them keeps asking, is this really true? And that question, however quiet, already places you at the edge of the group. From a very young age, we are trained to adjust ourselves to expectations. We learn when to speak, when to be silent, what to desire, what to suppress. This is not malicious, it is how societies function. But occasionally, a mind appears that does not fully settle into this training. It plays along, yes, but with an inner distance, and that distance is felt everywhere. You may notice it in conversations that feel oddly scripted, in ambitions that excite everyone else but leave you strangely unmoved, in traditions that are repeated with great enthusiasm but little curiosity. You nod, you participate, you perform, but inwardly something does not click. This creates a peculiar loneliness, not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of being surrounded. You are included, yet untouched, accepted, yet unseen. And the more you try to force yourself to fit, the more exhausting life becomes. Here is the crucial point. Most belonging is conditional. It depends on you playing a role convincingly. The moment you stop performing, the connection weakens. And somewhere inside you, perhaps unconsciously, you know this. You know that the belonging being offered requires a version of you that is not entirely honest. So you hesitate. You hover at the edges. You participate halfway. And people sense this, not consciously, but intuitively. They feel that you are present, yet not fully invested in the shared illusion. And so, subtly, you are treated as an outsider, even when no one intends to exclude you. Now let us be precise. Not fitting in is not a flaw of character. It is a mismatch of orientation. You are oriented toward meaning, while most systems are oriented toward maintenance. You are asking why, while others are focused on how. You are listening for what is unsaid, while others are responding to what is loudly declared. This does not make you better. It makes you different. And difference is uncomfortable in cultures that prize uniformity disguised as individuality. Think about how often people define themselves by labels, profession, nationality, ideology, personality type. These labels create instant familiarity. They allow people to locate one another quickly within a social map. But if you resist being reduced to a label, if your sense of self feels fluid or undefined, others struggle to place you. And what cannot be placed is often kept at a distance. You may have noticed that people ask you questions not to understand you, but to categorize you. What do you do? Where are you from? What do you believe? And when your answers do not settle neatly into expected boxes, the conversation falters. Not because you said something wrong, but because you refuse to simplify yourself. This is the hidden reason you don't fit in anywhere. You are not designed to live inside prefabricated identities. And prefabricated identities are the foundation of most social belonging. At this stage, many people conclude that something is wrong with them. They attempt to correct themselves. They mimic behaviors. They adopt opinions. They adjust their tone, their interests, their aspirations. And sometimes this works temporarily. They fit in, they are accepted, they are praised. But the cost is subtle and cumulative. A quiet dissonance grows between who they appear to be and what they actually experience. And this dissonance manifests as fatigue, restlessness, anxiety, or a vague sense that life is being lived slightly off-center. If you recognize this, I want you to pause and consider something radical. What if not fitting in is not a problem to be solved, but a signal to be understood? What if your discomfort is not asking you to change yourself, but inviting you to question the structures you are trying to belong to? Most people never ask this. They assume the group must be right and the individual must adapt. But history tells a different story. Every meaningful shift in understanding, philosophical, artistic, scientific, began with someone who did not fit in and refused to silence that friction. Yet this refusal does not need to be loud or dramatic. It can be quiet. It can be inward. It can simply be a decision to stop forcing yourself into spaces that require you to shrink your awareness. When you begin to look at this more honestly, you may notice something unsettling. The places where you almost fit are often the places where you feel most divided inside. You are close enough to belong, yet not free enough to be whole. And that tension drains energy in a way that obvious rejection never does. This is because fitting in usually demands unconscious agreement. You are expected to accept the group's values not as conventions, but as truths. You are expected to react on cue, to desire the correct things, to fear the correct threats, to admire the approved symbols of success. And if you hesitate even slightly, you feel the pressure to explain yourself. But clarity resists explanation, not because it is mysterious, but because it is prior to opinion. You may sense that many debates are not about truth at all, but about loyalty. To disagree is to risk exclusion, and to agree dishonestly is to exclude yourself. So you stand in between. This in-between state is deeply uncomfortable because it has no script. You cannot rely on inherited answers, yet you are not trying to replace them with new dogmas. You are simply noticing, and noticing does not offer instant belonging. Most societies are uneasy with people who notice too much. They prefer certainty, even when certainty is borrowed. They prefer confidence, even when it is hollow. To question the shared story is to interrupt the rhythm of collective reassurance, and interruptions are rarely welcomed. You may find that people misinterpret you. They may think you are aloof, critical, detached, or difficult to read. But what they are really sensing is that you are not performing the usual emotional signals. You are not advertising your identity loudly enough for quick recognition. And recognition is the currency of social life. When people recognize one another quickly, they relax. Ah, you are one of us. But when recognition is delayed, when you cannot be neatly classified, unease arises. And rather than sit with that unease, many people retreat. So you are left feeling invisible in groups, even when you are physically present. Conversations skim the surface, while something in you longs for depth. You hear words, but not meaning. You hear opinions, but not curiosity. And after a while, you may stop trying altogether. This is where many people mistake withdrawal for defeat. They assume their retreat is evidence of weakness, but often it is an instinctive act of self-preservation. You are protecting your attention from being consumed by performances that no longer nourish you. Let me say this plainly. Not every environment deserves your presence, and not every form of belonging is worth the cost of self-abandonment. The trouble is that we are taught the opposite. We are taught that belonging is always good and exclusion is always bad. But this is a crude distinction. Some forms of belonging require you to amputate parts of your awareness. Some forms of exclusion preserve your integrity. When you do not fit in anywhere, it may be because you are no longer willing to trade awareness for acceptance. This does not mean you are meant to be alone forever. It means your orientation is not toward crowds, but toward authenticity. And authenticity is selective. It cannot be mass-produced. Think about how rarely people speak from direct experience. Most speech is recycled phrases inherited from culture, media, education, ideology. And when you speak from something you have actually observed, felt, or lived, your words land differently. They are slower, less certain, more alive. And this makes people uncomfortable because it removes the safety net of repetition. Repetition is comforting. Original perception is destabilizing. So when you bring real presence into a room, even silently, you disturb the equilibrium. You remind others without saying a word that there is more happening than the script allows. And not everyone wants to be reminded of that. This is why trying harder to fit in rarely works for people like you. The effort itself increases the split. You become a better actor, but a poorer witness of your own life, and eventually something rebels. You feel tired of explaining yourself, tired of simplifying, tired of pretending enthusiasm where there is none. At this point, many people swing to the opposite extreme. They reject society altogether. They wear their non-belonging as a badge of superiority. But this too is a trap. It is still an identity, just a reversed one. It is still defined by opposition. True clarity does not need to oppose. It does not need to belong either. It simply sees. And seeing brings a different kind of connection, one that is not based on similarity, but on resonance. Resonance is rare. It cannot be forced. It happens when two or more people are speaking from the same depth, even if their words differ. You may only encounter this occasionally. In a brief conversation, in a shared silence, in a piece of music, art, or writing that seems to understand you without knowing you. And these moments may be few, but they are real, and they matter more than constant but shallow inclusion. If you don't fit in anywhere, it may be because you are not meant to distribute yourself thinly across many surfaces. You are meant to meet life more directly, more intensely, more honestly, and that path is not crowded. Stay with me, because there is still one essential turn to make, the final misunderstanding to dissolve. The realization that not fitting in anywhere does not mean you have no place. It means you have not yet stopped looking for yourself in the wrong places. Now we arrive at the point where the question itself begins to dissolve. Not why don't I fit in anywhere, but who is it that needs to fit in at all? Because hidden beneath the longing for belonging is an assumption so deep we rarely question it, the assumption that you are a separate fragment who must attach to something larger in order to be whole. From early on, we are taught that identity is something we acquire, a role, a name, a position, a story we can tell about ourselves. And once that identity is established, we are told to protect it, advertise it, and find others who recognize it. Belonging, in this sense, becomes a transaction between images. But if you look closely, you may notice that the more tightly you try to hold an identity, the more anxious you become, because anything you have to defend can be threatened. Anything you have to maintain can be lost. So the mind searches for safe containers, groups, ideologies, lifestyles, communities, anything that promises permanence. But permanence is not found in structures. Structures change, people change, values shift, and if your sense of self depends on these, you will always feel slightly unstable, slightly out of place. This is the deeper reason you don't fit in anywhere. You are beginning to sense that no external structure can actually hold what you are. At first, this realization feels disorienting. If you don't belong to this group or that worldview, then where do you belong? And the mind panics. It looks for a new category, a more refined label, a more authentic tribe. But the search itself is the problem. You are still trying to locate yourself as an object among objects. Clarity begins when you stop doing that. When you stop asking where you fit and start noticing what is aware of the question, something shifts. The sense of being a misplaced piece in a puzzle softens. You realize you were never meant to fit into life the way a piece fits into a machine. You are not a component. You are the field in which the machine appears. This is not a poetic metaphor. It is a direct observation. Thoughts, roles, relationships, and social identities all appear within awareness. They come and go. But awareness itself does not need to belong to anything. It is already whole. When this is seen not as an idea, but as an experience, the anxiety around fitting in loses its urgency. You still participate in life. You still relate, work, love, speak, and act. But you do so lightly. You are no longer trying to anchor yourself through others. And this changes everything. You begin to notice that belonging happens naturally when it is not demanded. Conversations deepen when you are not trying to be understood. Relationships become more honest when you are not afraid of losing them. And solitude becomes peaceful rather than threatening. This is why some of the most grounded people appear unconventional. They are not trying to signal identity. They are not broadcasting who they are. They are simply present. And presence does not need to fit in, it is already at home. If you look back on your life, you may realize that the moments you felt most alive were not the moments you were fully accepted by a group. They were the moments you were fully absorbed in what you were doing, creating, listening, exploring, loving. In those moments, the question of fitting in did not arise at all. That is your clue. Belonging is not something you achieve socially. It is something that dissolves as a problem when you are aligned internally. When you are not divided against yourself, the world no longer feels like a place you must earn entry into. So if you don't fit in anywhere, do not rush to correct that. Do not assume you are broken or unfinished. Consider instead that you may be ahead of a habit that no longer serves you, the habit of locating yourself through approval. The hidden reason you don't fit in anywhere is not because you are lost. It is because you are no longer willing to be contained by definitions that cannot hold your depth. And when you finally stop trying to fit in, you may discover something quietly astonishing. Life meets you more openly than ever before. Not because you changed yourself, but because you stopped pretending to be smaller than you are. There is no final group you must find, no perfect place you must arrive. There is only this moment, fully met, without the burden of needing to belong to anything other than what is already happening. And in that, you are home.